There's a weird kind of comfort in a scary story, right? That feeling you get knowing the monster on the page can't actually get to you. But what happens when the stories aren't fiction? What happens when the monster is real, the page is a scream, and the words are a desperate warning from someone who actually lived it? Reddit has become this strange, digital campfire for our time, a place where people share experiences that just don't make sense and encounters that make your blood run cold. The subreddits are LetsNotMeet and TrueScaryStories are basically archives of that darkness, just filled with these chillingly real stories of brushes with the worst of humanity, and sometimes, with things that aren't human at all. Tonight, we aren't just reading stories. We're listening to warnings. We're pulling 5 tales from these communities that will remind you that the most terrifying things in the world aren't just in the movies. They're in the car next to you at a red light. They're in the apartment down the hall. Sometimes, they even have a key to your door. So, turn the lights down, check the locks, and try to ignore that creak you just heard upstairs. Let's begin. First, I barely even noticed him. He was just the guy in the brown uniform who brought the packages. I barely even noticed him. He was just the guy in the brown uniform who brought the packages. NNER, and we'd do that robotic, have a good one, exchange. It was so normal, it was basically invisible. I'm a graphic designer, so I'm home all day. My office is a spare bedroom on the 2nd floor with a big window overlooking the street. I see everything, the mailman, neighbors walking their dogs, the school bus. It's a quiet, predictable rhythm. The change was small at first. A look that lasted just a second too long. A weird comment. Another one for you today, he'd say. But his tone was off. It felt less like a statement and more like he was studying me. Then one day it was, working hard in there, I see. The light's always on in that upstairs window. A chill went right down my spine when he said that. It wasn't an obvious threat, but it felt possessive. He wasn't just dropping off a package, he was keeping a log of my life. He knew my schedule. Soon, I'd get this knot of anxiety in my stomach whenever I saw that brown truck turn onto my street. Watch him from my window, hiding behind the blinds. He'd get out, walk up to the door, and instead of a quick knock, he'd just stand there for a moment, looking around. Looking at my car, looking up at my office window. One day, I decided to just wait him out. It was a small package, no signature needed. I watched him put it on the porch, but then he just stood there. He pulled out his phone, and I saw him aim it at my front door. He took a picture, then another. Then he slowly panned his phone up to my window. I ducked back so fast I almost knocked over my chair, my heart hammering in my chest. I told my boyfriend, Mark, about it. He was furious. What's his name? I'm reporting him. This is insane. But I didn't know his name. He was just the FedEx guy. And what was I going to say? He looks at my house funny? It felt pathetic, like I was just being paranoid. Mark started trying to be home for deliveries, but his job has him on the road a lot. The week Mark was on a business trip, it got worse. I started getting 2, sometimes 3 deliveries a day. Things I never ordered. A box of cheap pens from some random company. A single, ugly coffee mug. Every package was a new excuse for him to come to my door. The polite smile he used to have was gone. Now, it was this hungry, knowing smirk. His questions got more personal, too. Boyfriend out of town this week? He asked one afternoon, his eyes locked on the empty spot where Mark's car should be. I just nodded, my mouth completely dry, and slammed the door, bolting it behind me. The final delivery came on a Thursday. It was late, almost dark. I saw the truck park across the street, not in front of my house. He just sat there. For 10 minutes, then 20. The sun was gone and the street lights were flickering on. My hands were shaking. I called Mark, whispering what was happening. He told me to call the police, but again, I froze. What was the crime? A guy sitting in his truck? Then, the truck door opened. He got out, but he wasn't carrying a package. His hands were empty. He started walking across the street towards my house, his pace slow and deliberate. Was frozen, just watching him from the window like it was a horror movie. He walked up my driveway, onto the porch, and stopped right in front of the door. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He just stood there, in the dark, facing my door. My blood went cold. He knew I was in there. He knew I was watching him. This wasn't a delivery, it was a siege. I finally scrambled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice a choked whisper as I tried to explain that a man was just outside my house, refusing to leave. While I was on the phone, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. A soft, metallic scraping sound at the lock. He was trying to open my door. I ran from the living room and hid in the master bathroom, locking the door and pushing my body against it. The scraping stopped. Then I heard a quiet, conversational voice from the other side of the front door. "I know you are in there," he said. "I just want to talk. I see you every day. We're already friends, aren't we?" The police showed up minutes later, their flashing lights splashing across the walls. When I finally got the courage to look outside, he was gone. The cops took my statement, but without a positive ID. They said there wasn't much they could do. They did find fresh pry marks on my door frame. I still don't know who was sending all those packages, or if he was sending them himself. All I know is that he was delivering a message. "I see you, I know where you live, and I can get to you." We requested a different driver, and I never saw him again. But sometimes, when I'm working late, I'll see a car slow down on the street, and for one terrifying second, I'm right back there, watching him cross the road, knowing he's coming for me. We think of our homes as safe places, don't we? We surround ourselves with walls and locks to keep the bad things out. But the scariest monsters are the ones that don't have to break down the door. They're the ones we let inside. The ones who sleep just down the hall. When I moved into a 4-bedroom apartment for my master's program, I was honestly just happy to find a place. It was your typical student setup. 4 strangers, 1 kitchen, and walls so thin you could hear a pin drop next door. My roommates seemed fine. There was Sam, who was funny, and 2 other girls who were nice enough. The 4th roommate, in room 1C right next to mine, was a girl named Nellie. The others had warned me she was odd, but I brushed it off. I was going to be friendly. Nellie was quiet, painfully shy. She had this childlike face and almost never made eye contact. I felt bad for her. She said she didn't have any hobbies or friends, and I just figured she was lonely. So I made an effort to include her. In hindsight, that was my first mistake. Weird stuff started small. I'd come home and my bedroom door, which I always left open a crack, would be shut tight. Things on my desk would be moved, just a pen or a book. Nothing you could really call someone out on. Just this creeping feeling that my room wasn't just my own. I told myself I was just being forgetful. Then, my stuff in the shared bathroom started disappearing like crazy. My expensive shampoo was half empty in a week. Someone was definitely using my face wash. I confronted Nellie about it as nicely as I could, and she just stared at me with these wide, unblinking eyes and said it wasn't her. The dead-eyed denial was way creepier than an apology would have been. Her behavior got more and more bizarre. She would just appear silently in doorways, making me jump out of my skin. One night, I was in the kitchen, and she materialized behind me and asked me to go to the movies. I politely said no. She asked again, her voice totally flat. I said no again, forcing a smile. She just turned and went back to her room without a word. About an hour later, I went to use her bathroom. I opened the door, and this wave of pure disgust hit me so hard I gagged. The walls, the floor, the sink, even the toilet was smeared with a disgusting mix of feces and blood. You could see deliberate, smeared handprints in the filth. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my bone, that Nellie did this. It was a message, a punishment for saying no to her. I called a house meeting, my voice shaking with rage. Nellie just sat there, looking down at her hands as I described the scene. The other roommates were horrified. Nellie never said a word. There was no way to prove it was her, but we all knew. The air in that apartment got so thick with tension. I started locking my bedroom door all the time, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I felt like a prisoner in my own apartment. The breaking point came about a month later. I got home late from studying at the library. The apartment was dark and quiet. I unlocked my bedroom door, walked inside, and I just knew something was wrong. The air felt heavy. I flicked on the light, and my blood turned to ice. Nellie was sitting on my bed. In the dark, she was holding one of my sweaters and just stroking it. She looked up at me, and the shyness was gone. Her expression was pure, unfiltered obsession. "I was waiting for you," she said, her voice soft. "I wanted to tell you my plans for us." She then described, in this terrifyingly calm voice, a future where we would be best friends forever. We'd get our own place after graduation, just the two of us. She told me she knew I was the only one who understood her. She said she'd been keeping a journal about me, my habits, my clothes, my conversations. She told me she sometimes wore my clothes when I wasn't home because it made her feel close to me. I was paralyzed with fear. This was way beyond a creepy roommate. This was a stalker who lived in the room next to mine. I backed out of the room, stammering something about needing to get something from my car. I didn't stop running until I was at the campus security office. They escorted me back to the apartment to grab my things. Nellie was gone. Her room was completely cleared out. I never saw her in person again. But for the rest of that year, I swear I'd see her in crowds. The school didn't do much, saying she hadn't made any physical threats. They moved her to another building where, I heard later, she found new roommates. I learned a hard lesson: not all monsters hide in the dark. Some of them have a spare key and know your favorite shampoo. For about 3 months, our house just felt off. It's a hard feeling to describe. It was a bunch of tiny, weird things that didn't mean anything on their own. But when you put them all together, they created this deep, gut-level feeling of dread. It started with food going missing from the pantry. Not a lot, just enough to make you second-guess yourself. A can of tuna, a box of crackers. My wife, Sarah, and I would blame each other. "Hey, did you finish the granola bars?" "No, I thought you did." We just wrote it off as being busy and forgetful. Then the sound started. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up to what sounded like faint scratching from inside the walls. I'm not talking about mice. This was a heavier, slower sound. A rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. I'd lie there in the dark, straining to hear, my heart pounding. Sarah would be sound asleep next to me. In the morning, I'd tell myself it was a dream, or the house settling. Anything but what my gut was screaming it was. The feeling of being watched was constant. I'd be on the couch, and the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. I'd whip my head around, totally expecting to see someone standing in the kitchen doorway, but there was never anyone there. The air just felt occupied. Our 2 kids, 6 and 8, started complaining about a funny smell in their rooms. A musty, gross smell that we just couldn't find. We cleaned the carpets, we washed the curtains, but it never went away. The final piece of the puzzle, the thing that turned our quiet worry into pure terror, came from my daughter, Chloe. One night, I was tucking her in, and she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Daddy," she said, "the man with the bad eyes was watching me again." I froze. "What man, sweetie? From a story?" She shook her head, her eyes huge. "No. The man who comes out of my closet at night." I tried to stay calm. telling her it was just a bad dream. But her fear was so real. She said he would just stand in the corner of her room and watch her sleep. He never spoke. He just watched. The next day, I decided I was tearing the house apart until I found the source of the sounds, the smell, this feeling of another person in our house. I started with Chloe's closet. At the very back, there was a small panel leading to a crawlspace that ran over the entire second floor. It was just a dusty, forgotten space we never used. With a flashlight in my hand and a sick feeling in my stomach, I pried the panel open. The smell hit me first. It was the funny smell the kids were talking about, but 100 times worse. It was the smell of sweat, stale food, and human filth. I shined the flashlight into the dark, and the beam landed on a little makeshift nest. There were our old blankets, pillows from the linen closet, and piles of empty food containers, our food. My gaze followed the beam of light deeper into the space, and that's when I saw him. He was huddled in the far corner. A skinny, filthy man with wild, matted hair and the most terrifying, empty eyes I have ever seen. He was wearing an old t-shirt of mine that had gone missing weeks ago. For a second, we just stared at each other. Me, frozen on the edge of his world, and him, a cornered animal in the darkness of mine. There was no surprise in his eyes. Just recognition. He knew me. He'd been watching us. He'd been living in our walls, coming out at night to walk through our house while we slept. He was the scratching. He was the feeling of being watched. He was the man with the bad eyes. I slammed the panel shut and screamed for Sarah to call 911. The police came and eventually coaxed him out. He was a homeless man who'd found an unlocked vent outside months ago and had just been living there. He hadn't stolen anything valuable. He hadn't hurt any of us. He had just lived with us. A silent, secret member of our family. We sold the house 6 months later. We couldn't stay. Every creak in the floor, every shadow in the corner of my eye, it wasn't just the house settling anymore. It was the ghost of the man who lived in our walls. The horrors we've heard so far are terrifying because they're real, because they come from other people. But there are other stories, the ones told late at night, that hint at a different kind of fear. A fear of things that live on the edge of what we understand. Sometimes, the threat isn't human at all. Our next story takes us deep into the woods, where the light from a campfire doesn't do much to keep the old, hungry things of the forest away. Every year, my two best friends and I go on a camping trip. It's our thing, a way to get away from the city and get back to something primal. This year, we picked a remote spot in the Blue Ridge Mountains that we found on a map, promising total isolation. After a killer hike, we found the perfect clearing in a deep valley. Miles from any trail. As we set up camp and got a fire going, the silence of the forest just settled around us. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, watchful, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. As night fell, the woods started making the usual sounds, crickets, a distant owl. But underneath it all, there was another sound. It was low, a deep thrumming that seemed to be coming from the ground itself. We tried to explain it. A highway far away, a generator, nothing made sense. We were miles from anything. The sound was just unsettling. Like a giant heartbeat. Around 2 in the morning, the thrumming stopped. And the total, sudden silence was way more jarring than the sound had been. Even the crickets went quiet. It was like the whole forest was listening for something. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Not a deer or a bear. These were heavy, 2-legged footsteps, crunching on the leaves with a slow, deliberate rhythm. They were circling our campsite, just outside the ring of firelight. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. My friend, Liam, grabbed his huge maglite and blasted it into the darkness. The beam cut through the trees, but there was nothing there. Just trees. The instant the light hit the woods, the footsteps stopped. We stood there, backs to the fire, frozen, just trying to see or hear anything. After a minute, we started to relax a little, telling ourselves it was our nerves. Maybe another hiker got lost. Then we heard a voice. It wasn't a person. It was a perfect copy of my own voice, but it sounded wrong. distorted, like it was coming from a broken speaker. "It's so cold out here," it said, the words echoing from the darkness to our left. My blood went to ice. I hadn't said a thing. The three of us just stared at each other, our faces white in the firelight. Before we could even move, another voice, this time a perfect mimic of Liam's, called out from the other side of the camp. "Help me." Pure panic took over. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't another hiker. Something was out there in the dark, and it was smart. And it was messing with us. It knew our voices. We scrambled into the biggest tent and zipped it shut, as if a layer of nylon could actually protect us. We sat huddled together in the dark, just listening. The footsteps started again, closer this time. They walked right up to the tent and stopped. We could hear it breathing just outside the fabric. A wet, ragged sound, like its lungs were full of fluid. Then came the tapping. A single, bony-sounding finger tapping on the tent canvas right next to my head. Tap, 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 over and over. It went on for what felt like hours. We were too terrified to make a sound, convinced that if we did, it would do more than just tap. Sometime before dawn, it all just stopped. The breathing, the tapping, the feeling of it being right there, gone. We waited until the sun was all the way up before we even dared to unzip the tent. There were no tracks, no sign that anything or anyone had been there at all. We packed up in record time, basically running the whole way back to the car. We never really talk about what happened, but it's always there between us. I don't know what was in the woods with us that night. But I know I will never, ever go camping again. There's a strange comfort in knowing what you're up against. A human threat, you can call the police. A paranormal one, you can pray. But the deepest, most chilling fear comes from the unknown, when you can't tell the difference between the two. Our final story is about a neighbor whose mind started to break in a way that made it impossible to tell if he was losing his mind, or if something else was taking over. Lived in a small, second-floor apartment for 3 years. For the first 2.5, my next-door neighbor, Mr. Heck, was just there. He was an elderly guy, probably in his late 70s. I'd only see him shuffling to the mailbox or coming home with a single grocery bag. We'd do the polite, meaningless nod in the hallway. He was just part of the scenery. Then, one day, the scenery changed. It started with the noise. Not loud music or yelling, but a constant, low murmur coming through the wall. It sounded like he was talking to himself, but the rhythm was off. It was almost like a chant. It would go on for hours, day and night. It was unnerving, but I wasn't about to complain about an old man talking to himself. Then came the smell. A sickeningly sweet smell, like rotting flowers mixed with spoiled meat, started seeping through the vents. It was faint at first, but it got stronger every day until my whole apartment reeked of it. I started burning incense constantly just to breathe. I finally knocked on his door one day to ask if he was okay. He opened it just a crack. The smell that hit me was overwhelming. The guests he was talking about were birds. Dozens of them. Pigeons, crows, sparrows, they started gathering on his balcony and windowsills. He was leaving out mounds of food for them. But it wasn't birdseed. I saw him putting out chunks of raw meat and weird, jelly-like things that no bird would ever eat. And yet they swarmed his apartment, their cooing and cawing adding to the constant chanting from inside. The final stage was the most terrifying. I was coming home from work one night and found him standing in the hallway, completely naked, with his back to me. He was facing my apartment door, his head tilted at a completely unnatural angle. Just standing there, silent and still. My voice was trembling, but I called out his name. "Mr. Heck?" He turned around slowly. That same fixed smile was on his face, but his eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils. The entire eye, from corner to corner. They looked like polished black stones, reflecting the dim hallway light. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me with those terrible, empty eyes, then turned back to my door and went back to his silent watch. I ran down the stairs and called the police from my car. They came and took him away. They said he was having a severe psychotic break. They had to condemn his apartment. it was a biohazard, filled with filth, rotting food, and dead birds. They said he had painted strange symbols all over the walls. I moved out a week later. I had to, but I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't just mental illness. I think something found a home in Mr. Heck. A lonely old man in a quiet building was the perfect vessel. Something moved in, and it started to redecorate. It invited guests, and its final act was to stand in the hallway, turn its new eyes on me, and decide it was time to find a new place to live. The world feels a little different now, doesn't it? A little less safe. The shadows seem a little deeper. Every story you heard tonight came from a real person, a moment when their normal world peeled back to show the darkness hiding just underneath. These encounters leave scars that never really fade. They're a chilling reminder to always trust your gut. To listen to that little voice in your head that says something isn't right. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. If these stories have you looking over your shoulder, please support the channel by liking this video and leaving a comment. Do you have a story of your own, a let's not meet moment that still haunts you? Share it below. And of course, if you want to make sure you never miss another trip into the dark, subscribe and ring that notification bell. Until next time, stay safe and try to get some sleep. If you can.